I'm Ashton Addison from the Crypto Coin Show, and today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Nick, co-founder of Compute Labs. Nick, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Ashton, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
There's so much to talk about in terms of AI, the computational power needed, decentralized compute networks, and I think people are underestimating just how much computational power is going to be used in the next couple of years. I'm excited to dive into all of that today with you. I would love to start out with a little bit on what you and your team been building at Compute Labs, and then we can dive into all those details.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun topic. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Awesome. All right, let's kick it off.
Cool. Should we start with what is compute and what's happening with the industry and the growth of it?
I think so. That'd be great.
So you definitely hit the nail on it. The needs for compute is growing exponentially. What we know is that there's an aggregated growth rate for compute needs based on several different sources out there, about 30% a year. And what that means is that in general, by 2030, in only 5 years, uh, the demand for compute hardware is going to be just exponentially growing at that same rate. So about like 420 billion by then. Um, and what we know is, to your point, when we think that, okay, there's probably like a limited amount of use cases, there's not going to be like that much demand, like we think we probably like hit the curve, there's that much compute needed. No, it only grows more and more because innovation and engineering requires just more and more hardware. I mean, we have XAI and their coin gigafactories or infrastructure data centers. And then we have AWS and CoreWeave scaling their GPU data centers. There's just more and more hardware being used, and we're seeing this every day. So, for example, like we're getting demand from gigantic companies asking us to help them get like hundreds of $1 millions worth of hardware. So, yeah, the point is that this industry is growing. We don't talk about it as much as we did maybe 6 months ago or a year ago, but it's still growing.
Definitely. It seems like every new version of LLM that comes out is requiring 10 times more power and computation. And I think a lot of people don't really know, where does that compute power come from? Does it just come from an Amazon warehouse? Is it actually coming from decentralized networks? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on gathering that compute power and then getting it to the right place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Where are people getting their compute hardware from? So you're right that there's of course AWS and then there are the DePIN projects. So you can think of it, of course, as like one is centralized, one is decentralized. Um, and on centralized aspect of it, we have the big players. We have AWS, we have GCP or Google Cloud Services. We also have CoreWeave, and then we have smaller players like I don't want to call them small, but in comparison to AWS, I'm sure we have Lambda, I guess. There are a ton of cloud marketplaces out there, and the way they work is most of the time they have their own hardware that they own and they provide it to customers that need compute needs. And then there are going to be others who aggregate, kind of like RunPod, who um, they just getting it from different sources, similar to a DePIN project, except it's like Web2 based. And then we have the very Web3 DePIN projects, which are simply aggregating from as many variable sources as they can, sometimes even from uh, consumer grade, like retail people, just like you and I. Um, the difference is going to be when you have a use case that requires compute, which of these providers has more of the specific requirements you have in terms of hardware. So, for example, if I was going to be building out like a really heavy training model that needs super efficient computational needs, I can go to GCP or maybe AWS, but even sometimes they don't necessarily have all the hardware that I need. I can go to a DePIN project that maybe is pulling from all of these variable sources. But again, because they're pulling from different sources, altogether, it might not even mean it'll be enough for me to sustain the speeds and efficiency I need. So a lot of times, actually, what happens is these customers who are building these heavy AI products end up getting custom built or server structure. So they'll go to an operator who'll say, hey, like, hey, I have a very specific set of requirements. Can you get it for me? And then the operator go and does their thing. It's just custom built servers based on very unique cases.
Hmm. It's very interesting. And do you think that there is a growing role in the DePIN networks and with decentralized physical infrastructure networks? They're not always to do with just gathering resources for AI. There's a lot of different use cases, but
Yeah.
with gathering compute power, these DePIN networks, it seems like 2025 could be a year for major growth in physical infrastructure networks as the compute power problem seems more prominent. More people are aware that AI specifically requires a lot more compute. And hey, maybe there's potential to tap into phones or home computers, or there's a revenue generating opportunity for people. Do you think that's something that will like increase dramatically in 2025?
It's a good question. So I think of these different types of compute vendors or compute providers serving a different customer profile almost. When I think of DeepIn projects, I think they're really excellent at serving small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses. When I think about those other centralized players that we've been talking about, I think about them serving medium to large size businesses. And the difference is simply because of where they're pulling their resources from. Oftentimes on the DePINs, depends on what type of DePIN project we're talking about. So we have Aether, Hyperbolic, and IONET. These are really awesome DePIN projects and like all good friends. Um, and they're good for solving the specific use cases that they're built for. Aether is really good at solving video game needs. Hyperbolic is really good at serving AI inferencing and training needs. IONET is a good combination of both. Um, then we talk about what kind of customer profile can they help with, from small to large. When it comes to those aggregated resources from like, my phone, this laptop, or your devices, those have their needs. Um, Me personally, um, I don't know what problems they solve, but what I would gather is that they would solve economies of scale and they would probably make certain resources become way cheaper. I mean, you can get like 4090s on an hourly 40 like consumer grade RTX 4090s pretty cheap, pretty affordably on an hourly basis. If that's too expensive for certain businesses or certain, people practicing and trying their AI use cases, yes, these other devices can help, but I guess my question is like, how much cheaper do you need to get it to? Maybe it's not built for first world economies or like the United States or Canada. Maybe those would be more effective for Latin American demographic or the sub-Saharan African market. So
Mm-hmm.
some different markets, but I don't know if they'd be really effective for like the markets that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I feel like the ethos, in part, has always been to help the unbanked or to help the ones that couldn't normally access these kinds of services, whether it's just getting a bank account or if it's accessing AWS, and they charge a lot. For
Yeah.
anyone who's run a business, they know. So I definitely could see. Hopefully, the rest of the world and the developing countries can tap into and be the one to grow these DePIN networks, so that they can, and hopefully there's a revenue generation for the people in those countries that are also contributing.
That would be great. Yeah. I mean, any more business for growing economies is always great.
Hmm. And I'm specifically have always been interested in DeFi and decentralized finance, and now AI seems to be merging ever more so this year with blockchain and DeFi specifically. And I've seen this new term that's coined AIFi, and also DeFi with an AI at the end. Is Compute Labs involved with AIFi, working with that at all? And what can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we started using the term AI-fi back in March. I won't lie, a little bit of it is just marketing. But effectively, what we're trying to do is build the infrastructure, allowing investors to get into the growth of AI and AI investments. And that's why we coined it AI-fi, because our product is built around making sure that people can get into the investment growth of AI.
Interesting. And is that just for investing in AI related projects, or does the AI actually help you choose, manage any of those kind of functionalities of investing?
It's a good question. So why AI-fi? Why the usage of that in the name? Um, Really, it's part marketing, and then the other part is simply like making sure that people know that by investing in compute resources, they are enabling the growth of uh, the AI industry. So it's kind of like a commodity approach, like invest into the core asset that builds, powers, and enables AI.
Very interesting. And with gathering the compute power for AI, how is Compute Labs functioning efficiently in doing this? Can you talk a little bit more about the business relationship coming in and going out?
Yeah, certainly. So this is a, it's for me, this is the fun part. Basically, what we do is we raise capital. We raise capital through institutional, traditional finance, but also through retail investment from markets that we can take capital from. What we do with that is we then buy compute hardware. So mostly enterprise grade hardware like the B200 and H200s. However, we also do dabble in the consumer grade products like 4090s and 5090s. Now, what we do when we have that hardware, we actually lease it out to uh, operators. You can call them data centers or operators or data center operators. You can even call them like cloud service providers. The point is, we lease our hardware to them so that they can continue to scale and grow their businesses. Most of the time, they already have a customer lined up or demand lined up to use their hardware, which is why they need more hardware to serve their customers. So that's where we help them.
That's really interesting. And I keep hearing that, there's so much demand that's growing for AI that, as you said, they already have a customer that's demanding it. They need more. Is there a shortage of supply, or is there inefficiencies in the supply chain in getting compute hardware to actually start running and bringing that power for computing AI?
It's a really good question. There's The short answer is that there are inefficiencies in lead time. So oftentimes the provider that can get it most efficiently or fastest is going to be the winner to actually get the contract with the customer. And the point is that because, first you make an order to buy hardware for that custom built cluster, it's going to take like 6 weeks to get it. Then you need like 4 weeks to actually run it, test it, make it operational. And that's a lot of time already for a AI company that needs their thing done tomorrow. I mean, a lot of enterprise businesses, they think they need something tomorrow. And now, oftentimes there are going to be projects that know that they're planning for it, which is great, but there's also the opposite. Another area of inefficiency, I would say, though, is actually in the energy. A lot of data centers simply do not have the energy or power to actually continue scaling or growing. Sometimes it's legislative. So, for example, governments might actually forbid or prevent a data center from, um, using more resources than they can. And other times, data centers just simply are there aren't enough of them in certain demographics to actually put hardware in a specific area.
Hmm. Very interesting. And with an example, some of the clients that you're working with, are those data centers all in America? And what are the potentials of tapping into alternative forms of energy, or maybe mining Bitcoin on the side, or renewable energies, so that they can be able to run bigger operations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So Compute Labs in general, we work globally. We work with as many data center operators as we can. Whoever needs compute resources, whether it's the capital to buy it or the actual hardware, we'll serve them as long as, they're not from a sanctioned country. Um, that's one. And then on to answer, I think your later question, which is like using the uh, runtime that isn't being utilized or the underutilized processing power. Yeah. So there's a lot of like um, algorithms and products out there that can help you get the most or maximize your compute availability. And so basically, if your customer is locking in 80 or 90% and reserving most of your compute availability, then you can have like 10 to 20% that will either be used for mining, but also that's kind of why there's these DePIN projects out there. You can also
Mhm.
offset that allocation to those providers like Aether, IONET, and
Mhm.
Hyperbolic. So some providers do that as well.
Very interesting. And we've had discussions with Aether and IONET on the show before, but so AI compute seems to move so quickly that it's hard to keep up if we're already trying to keep up on top of blockchain as well. Um,
Yeah,
and
fair.
and with Compute Labs, do you guys tie into the blockchain ecosystem or have a token and that merging of AI and blockchain?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the short answer is yes. Well, effectively, what we're doing is we are tokenizing our hardware. So when we back up and I talk about how we're raising capital through those institutional investors and those retail investors. But the way we're doing it is that we are issuing a structured product. We're issuing an investable asset to these investors. And what happens is we're giving the rights to the hardware's revenue, the profits, and all the liquidation proceeds to those investors. And that's what a token means. So when you're an investor and you invest into one of Compute Lab's structured products, you get a one-to-one representation of your hardware. So if you're investing in H200, okay, you'll get a GPU NFT of a H200 product. What that means is that now that you own this one token of a H200, you'll get all its revenue. You'll get all its proceeds. When we sell it or liquidate it, you'll get all of those proceeds as well. And that's what blockchain is doing here, tokenizing the actual hardware.
Hmm. That's
So
really
real
interesting.
world asset, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, with it's like real world asset tokenization of if you're looking at buying and selling assets that are in a warehouse, you're not moving them. If somebody else wants to own it, it's still going to be computing the same thing in that warehouse. Then NFTs and real world asset tokenization is a great use case for this. It's very interesting. And what are some of the next steps for growth for Compute Labs and keeping up with the growth of AI in the industry for 2025? Some of those roadmap plans.
Yeah, great question. So, our priority right now is helping operators get more resources, whether it's the capital to buy hardware or just give them the hardware they need to serve their customers. So, we've already done a pilot with the B200 with our partner in Japan. That's going to go live in late February, early March. We're really excited about that asset because the B200 is very limited in access. Compute Labs is one of 8 of the largest suppliers in the world for it because that hardware won't be available to the mass market until like Q2, Q3 of 2025. But as we wait for that pilot to go live, we're constantly looking for more operators and data centers to help them. We have one lined up that we're going to be soon fundraising for. We're going to be needing a ton of capital to serve that one customer. But we also are looking for small clusters, 1 mil, 3 mil, 5 mil, these types of hardware clusters or operators that need that much. Happy to help those as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And what's the best way to learn more about Compute Labs and follow along with the work that your team's doing?
Yeah, we have a guy on our Twitter just like killing it. So follow us on Twitter. We have a lot of fun there. We also have our own Discord channel as well.
Sounds great, Nick. Thank you so much for the insights into computing, AI, where everything is going. I will leave a link in the show notes to the Compute Labs site, the Twitter and the Discord, as you mentioned, and wishing you and your team all the best moving forward. And I would love to follow up in the near future.
Thanks so much, Ashton. Great to be here. Appreciate it.